Hi, Vivienne.
Hi there.
I'm going to quickly introduce you and then I'm going to give you the stage. So, Dr.
Perfect.
Vivienne Ming explores maximizing human capacity as a theoretical neuroscientist, delusional inventor, and demented author. I just love her bio, what she came up with. By the way, this is all her. I wouldn't dare to call her delusional or demented. Over her career, she's founded 6 startups, been chief scientist at 2 others, and launched the mad science incubator, Socos Labs, where she explores seemingly intractable problems from a lone child's disability to global economic inclusion for free. As the co founder and chief scientist of Dionysus Health, she applies machine learning to lessen the corrosive health effects of chronic stress in communities. Vivienne was named one of 10 women to watch in tech by Inc. magazine and one of the BBC's 100 women in 2017. Please welcome Vivienne Ming.
Wonderful. Here we are. It's so great to be here chatting with you all. I had a chance to see your spiel about all the new projects going on for data ethics for all and the initiatives in education. Actually inspired me to start off our conversation here perhaps slightly differently than I was initially going to. I have a somewhat colorful history, calling myself a delusional mad scientist is just, truth in advertising. I certainly didn't start off my life underprivileged, although my family was not wealthy in a Silicon Valley sense. My dad was a doctor. My mom was a teacher. I grew up in coastal California. I had a lot of advantages. Actually, it was made pretty clear to me early on that I was supposed to win Nobel Prizes and somehow also be a sports star. I'm sure my parents had some sense in their head of how that would all balance out, but they weren't cruel about it. It was just, of course you will. And so I internalized that and thought the same sort of things. Of course, I'm going to be this world-changing person. And the more I tried to be that person, the worse everything got, until unfortunately, I ended up homeless. And so from that self-inflicted moment, I found some purchase back in life. And over the course of a very brutal 10 years, the 90s are not my favorite decade. I found my way back into academia. And I did my undergraduate. I didn't know what I wanted to research. We were just talking about learning how to program. That wasn't in my head. I flipped a coin. I was either going to study economics or neuroscience. I am enough of a snob that despite the terrible failures in my life, I was going to do something concrete had actual numbers associated with it. And those were two things I could finish in a single year. I cannot answer why I thought I could do such a thing. But nonetheless, this was some sort of, as aforementioned, delusional plan I had for my experience in my undergrad. So it came up heads. I study brains. So I started my undergraduate degree in cognitive neuroscience and was almost immediately, it was taking this programming course called Introduction to C for Cognitive Modeling. And I got a perfect grade in the class. I've never had success like that. I got perfect grades in all of my classes. Again, I flunked out of school. That was my last experience with school. And suddenly professors were coming to me, like the professor of this course, and the only programming course I've ever taken. And he said, would you be my teaching assistant next year? And by the way, I've recommended you to work at this place called the Machine Perception Lab, a lab on campus at the University of California at San Diego, sponsored by the CIA to do research into real-time facial analysis for lie detection. I think we can figure out why the CIA was interested in such shady, ethically highly questionable technologies. But I'll tell you, as someone that had no idea about what AI was outside of science fiction novels, actually writing the code that could find a philtrum. If you didn't know what that little fold under your nose was called, that's what it is, and pupils. And from that, figure out whether someone was smiling. It was amazing. And I somewhat very quickly realized I don't really want to stick wires into cat brains or give macaques rabies retrovirus to trace out their motor pathways. I want to do this field called theoretical neuroscience, which again was just dumb luck. I mean, lucky that my life didn't end on the streets, and then lucky again to just walk into this incredible opportunity and learn the phenomenal power of data and machine learning and programming. But I'm going to extend this story a little bit to argue that its real value is its creative value, its ability to solve problems. And eventually we're going to talk about ethics, and we're going to talk about learning routine skills and everything in between. But in this case, being part of some of the early work in real-time facial recognition and analysis has given me an interesting perspective over the last few decades, watching that work evolve. Particularly because my undergraduate lab spun off as a startup and eventually got bought by Apple. So if you have an iPhone, its facial recognition is the outgrowth of things I worked on a couple decades ago as an undergrad. It's an interesting thing to know that you were there at the moment that this thing that has touched 100 million people's lives. And frankly, from the algorithms we developed there that have spread out through academia and beyond, it's touched billions of lives. Because I'm sure we've all seen news stories of abuses of facial recognition systems. And I'll be clear, many of them really are. Systems that can't see dark-skinned faces. Systems that think that most of the major professional athletes in Metro Boston are probably wanted criminals. I'm guessing because they're either Black or have tattoos. These are not good systems. And in fact, one company in particular claims they can analyze your face and tell whether you'll be good at a job. I happen to have actually been the chief scientist of one of the very first companies using AI in hiring, as well as someone who's built many facial recognition systems. And I will tell you, no such science exists. That's someone who's selling something into the market, which is inarguably wrong and unethical. Is it possible that someday we might be able to use information about faces to advance our understanding of hiring or even policing? It's possible. But as this case exemplifies, we haven't made great choices on the negative side. But I also have some other stories to share about facial recognition. For example, very early in my career as an entrepreneur, I went off to grad school and then was a faculty at University of California, Berkeley, and had a joint appointment at Stanford for a little while. And then my wife and I had an idea to start an education startup. And during that time, I also did some collaborations with Google. In fact, they gave me a pair, if any of you were around at the time to recognize Google Glass. This is actually, I think, the third pair that they gave me at some point. They gave me this not because I'm a hardware person or even a software person, to be perfectly honest. I have written, God, I don't know how many lines of code in my life, quite a few. I hated every second of it. What I love about programming is it's an astonishingly powerful tool for solving problems. So when Google gave me an early release pair of glass, what they said was, can you come up with ideas of cool things to do with it? And so I did. And one of those things, analyzed faces. It read expressions. And there's all sorts of things that could be done wrong with that. Obviously, maybe the CIA wears a pair to tell whether you're lying or not, or maybe a bank loan officer wears them to float everyone's credit scores over their heads, or I call up your Facebook account or your LinkedIn account whenever I see you. Could be a great many things. I built it because I wanted to give someone a superpower. I want to give them the ability to read facial expressions, because it turns out they had autism. And one of the most common symptoms of autism is an inability to read facial expressions, something the rest of us get for free. They can learn it, but it's a bit like a foreign language. They have to explicitly learn. So I had this chance to build a system where, instead of looking at cartoon flashcards where a stick figure was smiling and you had to learn that that meant happy, I thought, what if kids could wear these glasses and see an actual smiling person who they were actually interacting with? And then up in the little heads-up display, it would tell them whether the person was happy or not, whether they were smiling at least. Are they angry? Are they bored? What we found is, not only is it a much better way to learn to read facial expressions, but it actually built their empathy, their theory of mind, which many people thought was a completely separate symptomology. But perhaps if happiness and sadness is simply something you learn to recognize and not something you ever actually see emerge, someone is becoming happy because I did a thing, it becomes really hard to learn how and why other people feel and think the way they do. So we were able to use facial recognition to help some people that needed a little help. And another instance, actually during also the time of my very first startup, we were contacted by a group working with the UN. And it's a wonderful story unto itself, but I'm just going to cut it short here and say, I was building the system that could learn how students were performing in a class and provide little tiny interventions to help them get through the material. And we'd done a demo that involved faces for the venture capitalist that was investing in the startup, to show that our system could learn, for example, how we perceive faces, not just about the faces themselves, but how we built this system that was a guessing game, where you would have an idea in your head, Southeast Asian, mutton chops, and a sense of ennui. And if you were actually consistent in how you made those judgments, our game could guess the faces that fit your category. And then we'd show them to you. And it was very cool. We actually even built another little game called Sexy Face. I know I'm terrible. Our promise was that for $5, we will find you someone you think is sexy. But the truth is, it was all a trick. We tricked people into playing the game, and then we confessed it was just a mind-reading game. As they played, they trained our algorithm to learn about how people perceive faces. Now, clearly, this is a bit of a data ethics situation. Tricking people to play a game. They think they're going to get laid. We're not actually going to do that. But our actual goal was to reunite orphan refugees with extended family members. We were building a system for which the UN's existing system, which was literally a book with 1 million photographs in it, 1 million kids lost in camps around the world. And if you're an uncle from Aleppo and you're fearing the worst, you haven't heard from your sister's family, and you go to a camp in Jordan, they give you the book. We built a little tablet system. And based on the training of our algorithm, that uncle could say, my niece looks a little bit more like this person and a little bit more like that child. And what we found was, on average, if you give it about 3 to 5 minutes of engaging with the tablet, and if your niece is in any camp anywhere in the world, you found her. And that provides a very different sense about data and ethics than what we typically get. Typically, the question about artificial intelligence seems to only have two answers, yes or no. Can we allow the abuses of artificial intelligence? Can we continue in a world where companies abuse their powers, where governments abuse their authority? Yes or no? And yet, I just laid out two examples, two classes of examples of abuses and of, I genuinely believe, genuine good. The answer to these questions can never be yes or no, unless we think so little of ourselves, so disgraced ourselves in our own eyes that we can't be trusted. We can't be trusted to use our own tools to better our lives. Now, there are reasons why we shouldn't just allow these things out into the market with no controls whatsoever. But surely we can see that it's possible to use data and artificial intelligence in ways that can change lives. And let me say, both of those programs, the original versions of all that stuff, I programmed myself. Nowadays, I get to pay other people to do that. I'm too expensive, actually, for you to possibly afford me to write code, but I do occasionally just for fun. I don't love programming, but I love solving problems. In fact, when you're thinking about going into a program or sponsoring one, think hard about what I'm about to say. Artificial intelligence is one of the most powerful tools developed in the last 50 years, but it's just a tool. It can't magically solve problems that we cannot find the solutions to ourselves. There are only ever messy human problems, and they only ever have messy human solutions. It doesn't matter that machine learning is based on hard numbers or that the data is some objective external resource that we bring to bear on a problem. At least at this point, exploring the unknown is still a purely human domain. And what's amazing about being able to program, about using massive data sets, which I've been able to do at many of my companies and even nowadays in my philanthropic work, is that it really can allow you to take a good idea and reach so many more people. It fundamentally changes the economics of a solution, even if it can't truly discover the solution all on its own. Again, the answer to the grand ethics question of data and AI can never be yes or no. It always has to be a harder decision. How do we maximize the benefits while making certain no one group in society pays an unfair cost from these systems? So I've had the chance to do a lot of different things, and I'm playing the timing here a little bit by ear because we got started a touch late. But I'm going to shift into a slightly different space. I loved my work with faces. It's actually very fun doing that kind of analysis because you can see the result right away, right in the data. You train a machine learning algorithm and you can actually look at what aspects of faces it looks at. It's all encoded within the neural networks itself. But other things are less clear, like hiring. What if I wanted to understand who should get a job? Turns out I can build a machine learning system and artificial intelligence that can analyze millions of resumes in just a few seconds. That is a powerful thing. Even if maybe it isn't as good as a human recruiter, the economics of that are pretty hard to deny. Recruiters look at three things on a resume: your name, your school, and your last job. I think we can all guess what the whole name thing is about. And it's pretty ugly, to be perfectly honest. Can AI do something better than that? Well, I was the chief scientist, as I said, of one of the first companies looking at machine learning and hiring. We built a data set of 122 million people, publicly available data, but the amount of data we could collect about people was astonishing. I don't think many people appreciate how much they make public about themselves. online as they go through life. It's really astonishing. We collected this data, allowed everyone to opt out. You can just send us a little message and we'd pull your data out. In the entire history of the company, 12 people out of 122 million ever requested their data be removed. It's not much of an offer when you know no one's really going to take you up on it. But we put all this data together, and then we analyzed over 400,000 variables associated not with whether you get hired. Again, that's really easy to answer. I look at your name, your school, and your last job, and that predicts, wow, a whole lot about who gets a job at an elite company. But who writes the best code? Who has the most sales? Does the best design work? Turns out that's a very different story. Turns out, in fact, once I know other things about you, name, school, and last company don't tell me anything. Interestingly enough, the reason you maybe got into Stanford is the reason Stanford is an interesting predictor of success on the job is not because of anything Stanford itself did to you, but because of deeper qualities about you that got you into Stanford in the first place. In fact, in our analysis, one of the first and largest ever done in the world, we looked at the value add of every major university in the entire world on a number of different things, but particularly for professional software developers. And we found, sure enough, Stanford was the single best university in the world in terms of its linear added value. What little extra boost does it give on average to people that had a Stanford degree? Behind them was, let's see, Stanford, CMU, I think Berkeley was at the end, Caltech, MIT. It became much more international after you got out of that top 5, but that was the top 5. But you know what was not only higher than Stanford, but an order of magnitude higher in its predictive validity? Resilience, social skills. In software developers, can you believe it? It's actually true. Social skills are not as prevalent in software developers as they are in salespeople. But fascinatingly, turns out it's just as predictive of who writes the best code. Being able to understand other people is part of your ability to solve problems. And that's what software development is. It's problem solving. Computer science isn't a degree in programming, as valuable a skill as that is. It's a degree in how to solve problems, the science of problem solving, and being able to understand other people, being able to fail and push through it, the core of what makes someone resilient. These turned out to be the things that are predictive of great software developers and great salespeople and designers. And actually, as it turns out, little kids that will grow up to have long, happy, healthy, wealthy lives. It's fascinating being able to look at massive data sets and see some real fundamental truths that have nothing to do with your gender or your race, but are predictive of what it means to live a wonderful life. So I treasured the fact that I had the opportunity to do this. But, you know, over these 20 years, working in facial recognition and applying my algorithms to who gets a job, or at least an interview, and also working in health. I developed one of the first artificial intelligence systems for diabetes. I developed the first system that could predict manic episodes in bipolar sufferers 3 to 4 weeks before they occurred. I have a new company, Dionysus Health, that's looking in the public health space. Boy, it is really hard when you're in the midst of building a company like that to do the right thing. When there's so much money at stake and your career and your reputation, everything is right there in front of you. There's a multi-billion-dollar IPO over here, and all you have to do is don't tell everyone exactly what you're doing with their data. It's for their own good. Don't worry, it will all work out in the end, but just for now, let's just keep moving forward as quickly as we can, knowing that we're good people and we're never going to do anything wrong. But in fact, we make mistakes and do things wrong all of the time. Courage, it turns out, it isn't just something you have. It's something you have to practice. And those moments you need to prepare for are the very moments where everything you want is in that direction and everything the world needs is over there. And it is so hard to see that what you want isn't what everyone else needs. And to really take the time to understand the problems that you're trying to solve, rather than just throwing masses of data and incredibly massive scale algorithms at a problem and hoping it will figure it all out. It never does. In fact, after I was the chief scientist at Guild, I got recruited by a whole lot of well-known companies, from Uber to Netflix to Amazon. And Amazon famously had a bit of a blow up because they developed an algorithm to improve the diversity of their hiring, and that algorithm wouldn't hire women. And I guarantee you, not racial minorities either. And I actually was there when they got started, and I told them it wouldn't work. You can't just take a complicated problem and throw an algorithm at it. In fact, I don't even think they had the right question. Who gets a promotion in their first year at Amazon? When we know that so much of their data, of their own past hiring history, is going to be biased in favor of men. You need to build a system that understands causally who will do the best work. And that's really hard. So I've started a number of companies, and I've developed a bit of a philosophy. I call it my lark's vomit theory of entrepreneurship. It is unique in some ways to the tech industry, but I actually think it generalizes pretty well throughout all of life. And if you're not familiar with the rather vague reference of lark's vomit, it comes from the famous Monty Python skit, the Wizzo Chocolate Assortment Company, where in the skit, the proprietor of the company has made a series of increasingly disgusting and even dangerous candies, chocolates, that a police officer is sampling as he goes. And he comes to the ram's bladder cup. And the proprietor describes it as a fondue of ram's bladder, lovingly encased in glucose and garnished in lark's vomit. And the constable says, lark's vomit? Where does it say anything about lark's vomit? And the proprietor says, oh, it's right here in the ingredients, right after monosodium glutamate. And the police officer says, there should be a massive warning label, warning, lark's vomit, right on the cover of that box. And the proprietor says, but our sales would plummet. The reason I share this very silly story is, imagine what would happen to the sales of many tech companies if right at the top of their webpage, they told you how they made their money, which for almost all of the biggest companies you can imagine involves selling you. It involves selling your data, not always with some deep malice, sometimes with a genuine idea that it will make your life better. I've had the chance to collaborate with many people at Amazon, at Google, at Facebook, elsewhere on projects to reduce suicide risk or understand hearing loss. People don't go into these jobs thinking they're the villain in the story. But very quickly, it turns out that these algorithms, even removed of bias, at least in theory, even doing exactly what they're supposed to do, are no longer serving you, the person whose data they are using. So in that sense, and I think I'm headed towards a wrap-up time here, but correct me, anyone, if I'm wrong. In that sense, I wanted to try something very different. I've mentioned that I have a new company called Dionysus Health. Now, we're not out in the market or selling anything, so there's a website if you're curious, but we're looking at the public health space. Turns out there's a much better business in probably selling a pill for heart attacks, or better yet, selling a pills for sexual dysfunction. But that's not what I'm interested in. Almost all of the gains in human longevity over the last 30 to 40 years have been in public health. They've been in reducing accidental deaths. They've been in the effects of diet and exercise on heart health. They've been in areas of helping people lead better lives. If you want to make a change, that's where you make it. Before someone is sick, while they're still in the midst of their lives, allow that life to be as wonderfully long and healthy as possible. To that end, we're specifically looking at the relationship between chronic stress, you, and ischemic heart disease, absenteeism at work, type 2 diabetes, bipolar disorder, major depression, wealth accumulation. Whatever you might think of would be a thing you'd want to be true about you throughout the length of your life, that it is healthy, wealthy, and happy. Those are the things we're interested in. But you can imagine, to learn enough about you to say, here's something you could change that would make a positive difference in your life, we have to collect a lot of data. And whatever I might personally believe, once a company collects a lot of data, that's something of value. That's something boards begin to look at as, boy, we need to think of how we can monetize all of that information about all of our customers. Acquirers look at it and salivate. Oh my goodness, how many of my companies have been bought for their data? So in this case, I thought, I want to put my money where my mouth is, quite literally. And so we're starting something called a data trust. This is a nonprofit that we're spending our own money to create. It will be entirely independent of our company, and it will own the data as a trust for our users, who themselves can elect the trustees. In other words, the very thing most companies build their value proposition on, we will never own. We are voluntarily never going to have the ability to leverage the value of that data, because that's not actually the value that we're trying to bring to the world. Our value is that you live a longer, happier life. Not anything about whether a political consultant can better target you with a voter registration drive, or a consumer goods company can figure out what kind of product you want to buy, or maybe even something worse. Why don't we just take it completely off the table right from the start? If we believe that this is right, if we believe that it is so important that people have insights into themselves and what will give them a healthy life, that I would personally pay to see it happen, even if it never made a dime, then surely I don't need to own your data or do anything with it. So this is what we're doing. And it turns out, oh my goodness, what a pain in the ass. This is turning out to be a gigantic project. You can imagine we're trying to build something equivalent to the entire App Store, an infrastructure that can run algorithms on this data that is entirely controlled. If we were to share the data out, even with our own company, then we could never claim that it was safe. It's a massive undertaking. And I hope someday this is the norm. Facebook doesn't need to own your data. Neither does Google. You should own it. Not figuratively, literally. You should own it through a trust. And that trust can be arranged in whatever way you want. Maybe that trust actually chooses to give that data away and reaps all the benefits. Maybe it only allows scientists to analyze the data and no one else. Or it makes judgments in case to case. Whatever works for you. I actually don't think there's one right answer here. Much like there should never be a yes or no about the use of artificial intelligence, I actually love the idea that trusts themselves can be a grand experiment, many different kinds, exploring what works and creating different communities. We will start ours and immediately set it free. And the community of our users will decide how that trust evolves and how that data evolves inside it. And if we continue to provide the genuine health and wellness value that we believe that we will, then people will continue to entrust their data with us. And that's the way all of this should work. I've had a long and wonderful career. I have the coolest job in the whole world. In fact, forget my startups. My main job is people bring me incredibly challenging problems. My daughter has 500 seizures a day. Please save her life. Our country doesn't know what to do about education policy. Our company has bias in its hiring. Please help. And if I think my team can help, I pay for everything. And if we actually come up with a solution, we just give it away. Turns out it's the worst startup idea ever because it's not really a startup. That's what I get to do. That's the job of a mad scientist. And it comes from learning how to solve problems. Programming is an astonishing tool for accomplishing that. But what you truly need is the ability to explore the unknown. So tonight, as soon as this is done, I want you to go out and plant a tree, because the world gets better when old men plant trees.
When old men plant trees.
They're never going to shade under that tree. They won't even be here anymore. When you make a sacrifice,
Selfless.
The world gets better. It turns out, so does your life. People that make more sacrifices during their lives actually, quite paradoxically, end up with better lives. It's a fairly strong predictor. I have a book I'm working on called Small Sacrifices around that idea, discovered via data analysis of 500,000 employees at a very, very large company, and then generalized from there. Data and AI is a wonderful thing. It allows you to understand us even better, but it's what you do with it that really matters in the end.
I completely agree with you, Vivienne, on that, when you send good messages out in the world, it comes back to you. When you set your life path to help others, the circle of life, the vibrations, they come and help support you. The whole world congregates to help support you in so many different ways, and it comes back to you in ways that you cannot count, you had never even thought of. So that's the act of selfless. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So please, everyone, go out, plant a tree tonight, figuratively. Find the thing you want to do. If you're young and you want to get involved in one of these free coding courses that were talked about earlier, do that. But here's my recommendation. While you're doing it, pick a project, a real thing that you want to change in your world. And as you're learning how to code, how to build a website, how to build an app, whatever it is, build the thing that you think will make a difference. Now, I hate to tell you, be prepared for it not to work. It never works the first time. But you learn so much about the realities of the problems you're trying to solve when you actively engage with trying to solve them. So put them hand in hand. Go find that opportunity to learn to code. Learn probability theory. Oh my goodness, I love the math that I get to do. Learn about brains or economics, whatever you want. But they're all just tools. Learn how to take them into the real world. Find something you are willing to make a sacrifice about, and use those tools to create a change. Don't look for it to come back to you or to pay back. That's a nice truth to know. But ultimately, you should do these things because they are more important than anything else.
If you do it with that intention that it will come back to you, it's not going to. That's how life works. You have to do it selflessly. You have to give it like you don't want it back. You don't want anything in return. That's when life will surprise you.
I have to say, that was one of the big things I had to learn over the course of my life. I thought I was supposed to do these things because people said I was smart, or because I needed to show people how smart I was. And that quite literally led me to a life where I didn't even know where my next meal was coming from. When I learned it wasn't about me, the great paradox is, and boy, it was hard. I wouldn't wish, I want everyone to know the lesson. I don't want anyone to go through the course that I took to learn it. But eventually, with that as my philosophy, it's not about me. It's not about whether I was happy. I found happiness, and then I found success. And now I get to, I mean, the world's a little crazy right at the moment, but it's starting up again. I get to fly around the world and help on some of the biggest problems in the world. I have the most amazing life. And I firmly believe it's because it's not about me.
On that note, thank you, Vivienne. Awesome talk. Loved everything that you said. Completely agree with a lot that you said. We are just out of time here, but amazing talk. And thank you so much for being here today. And we'll continue the conversation. Take care.
It was
Bye-bye.
a pleasure. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.